not just spiritual. We have to remember the carnal or physical also. Genetic makeup matters. Yeah, I think everything that we're experiencing, I think what Josh said is correct. That's where the physical and the spiritual meet. Our genetics, of course, the science of genetics is still very new, but I am a believer that as much as my eyes are one color versus another that's determined by genetics, I do believe that my temperament is controlled by these things too. We're born with a certain temperament, which is just a certain type of mental state. We then modulate that, our environment and our experiences modulate and change that. One of the cool sort of things I came upon, and maybe I could get maybe there's some disagreement about this, and I'm curious. Again, this is a thought experiment, and I'm curious what other people think about this. So we come into the world with a genetic makeup, which is then modulated by our culture, our parents, our experiences, our environment, the external world. We have an internal structure that is then modulated by the external world through our experiences, and that gives us our personality type, right? So it kind of occurred to me like what else is there? It just never occurred to me that even from a spiritual perspective that genetics could play such a huge role in who we are. My belief is that we are copies, our conscious awareness are copies of the OG consciousness. But it did bring me to this question of what is it that's different? And the thought experiment goes, if I could somehow magically go back in time and take my consciousness and put it in your body when you were a baby, and I would live your life, would I make any decisions differently? Because I think even in our judgment of others, we tend to think, if I was that person, I would never do that. And I started to sort of wonder can our lives be lived any other way? From my experience in the spirit realm, apparently, our lives are over. If you're in the spirit realm, from your perspective, life and the universe itself is already over and complete, and that you're outside of it. And once you're outside of it, it's already complete. The story is known. The story has played out in the only way that it can. There's the multiverse stuff. There's all sorts of things that people get into. And every quantum decision spawns a new universe. I get it, but I just don't believe it, I feel like that requires a lot of explanation. Just this idea that each soul is new. The notion that you could live somebody else's life and make different choices is just a misunderstanding of what's happening. We have choices to make, right? And we don't know the choice that we're going to make, but we make it. You will do what you will do. Can we do things differently? Paula mentioned genetic memory, and I'm a big Frank Herbert fan. Between genetics and the Akashic Records, genetic memory seems to be real. Even within our own lives, the way we react to our environments is modulating our genetics somehow, so that if you were to have a kid at one age, they might inherit different genetics than if you had a kid when you were older. there might be some spiritual component that we can't sort of see from our perspective now that is influencing evolution in different directions, God does seem to work through evolution, and I'm open to alternative theories, but the creationist view of biology has left me a little, it feels like there's something lacking there. Like, I don't have a problem with evolution as a concept that God would use to create beings like humans. And of course, I do recognize Darwinian evolution is incomplete. It's not a complete theory. It doesn't explain these big jumps in speciation. It might actually just be that because time and the cosmos is kind of a loop, that the end is influencing the beginning. And so, yes, like evolution's going to unfold in a specific type of way because of where it's headed, if that makes sense. And, I think my perspective sometimes might frustrate maybe some spiritual people because, I am coming from a materialist background, and it's hard for me to shake certain ideas like evolution. I don't have the same sort of aversion that I think a lot of Christians might who were raised with Christianity. I'm down to hear some counter arguments that aren't just going to quote scripture at me and rely on someone else's interpretation of that scripture.